You ever go to your printer and find it happily printing away, but there's nothing coming out of the nozzle? If you're serious about 3D printing, you've probably experienced the annoying problem that we call no extrusion. So your print has definitely failed. Maybe you just ran out of filament, or maybe you have a full nozzle clog. No extrusion can happen in a bunch of different ways, and by the end of this video, you should have a good idea of what you can do to prevent it from happening to your 3D printer. I'm Steven from 3DQ, and today is our third video out of 14 on our video series about 3D printing failure detection using our QuinlyVision AI. When your 3D printer doesn't print, something's definitely wrong, but it can be hard to find out the specific reason why. Well, that's what we're working toward with QuinlyVision. QuinlyVision analyzes webcam data to determine when nothing is being extruded from your nozzle. It can then alert you and also cancel your print. Today, we'll talk about why no extrusion happens, how QuinlyVision can detect no extrusion, and what you can do to prevent it from happening on your 3D printer. So what is no extrusion? What does it look like? It's pretty simple. There's nothing coming out of the nozzle. And I guess the more important question is, how does QuinlyVision detect no extrusion? So in general, QuinlyVision looks at your nozzle, and if nothing is coming out of it, then it marks it as a no extrusion situation. But it's actually not as simple as just observing the nozzle, since sometimes the nozzle should be moving without extruding. So for example, during a homing or a travel move. So we need to filter those out. QuinlyVision does this by reading your G-code in real time, so it knows if your printer is not extruding when it should be. If you want to detect when your filament runs out, QuinlyVision can be used alongside a filament runout sensor, but we're actually working on getting the response time fast enough that it can save your prints without needing a secondary sensor. So a warning sign for no extrusion is under extrusion, which I actually talked about in a previous video. And another key indicator is the sound of the extruder motor clicking. That means there's not enough material coming out of the nozzle, or maybe no material coming out of the nozzle in this case. Another thing QuinlyVision looks for when detecting no extrusion is a large gap between the nozzle and the layers of your print. If there's nothing coming out of the nozzle and there's a large gap between the nozzle and the print, then it's very likely that you have some sort of nozzle clog or your filament has run out, so it'll trigger a failure. Okay, so why does no extrusion happen? A very simple reason is your filament just ran out. You can just make sure that you have enough filament when you print your part. Another common reason is a defect in the filament or the filament snapping during printing. So similarly, make sure you have good quality filament and make sure that your filament is kind of feeding into your extruder with a nice angle so it's not getting like caught or bent anywhere along its path. One more thing about the material is if your roll is tangled, then that's going to cause a no extrusion problem. And tangles don't usually happen when the material is manufactured, it's usually on your end. So just be careful when loading the filament and make sure you keep track of the tip. No extrusion also happens if there's a nozzle clog. So a common way for a nozzle to get clogged is if there's debris in the nozzle that is not kind of meant to be there. So something like dust or maybe imperfections in the filament. One thing you can do to prevent nozzle clogs from happening is just having a good quality filament. Usually the really cheap stuff doesn't have as good quality control, and you might get little bits of dust or other particles that'll build up in your nozzle and eventually clog it. Another thing to keep in mind is materials with fill inside, like wood PLA or metal PLA or other types of polymers, will have a higher chance of clogging just because of the particles in them. It's kind of hard to make sure that they're going to fit through every single nozzle. One thing you can do to prevent debris from causing a nozzle clog is actually to use a bigger nozzle. I found anywhere from a 0.6 to a 0.8 millimeter nozzle rarely clogs for this reason, and it's one of the reasons why we use large nozzles on most of our printers in the 3DQ print farm. Another reason for nozzle clogs is something called heat creep, and this is when the plastic in your hot end gets soft too early or too high up. And this is because the heat sink on the hot end isn't getting enough cooling. So one thing you can do if you think you might have heat creep is check that your fan on your hot end is actually running, or that it's running at full speed. Because sometimes if there's material in the way, or there's like hair or like filament strings, that can cause the fan to run at a lower speed than it normally would and prevent the hot end from being cooled sufficiently. So since QuinlyVision is able to detect no extrusion, this can really help with automated 3D printing, because one of the worst things is when your printer is printing like overnight or on the weekend and there's just nothing coming out of the nozzle, it's just wasting time. When QuinlyVision, at least it'll notify you when it's happening so that you or someone else can change the filament or fix the nozzle clog to keep production running overnight or on the weekend or just in your day-to-day. If you want to try QuinlyVision for yourself, check out our demo. It's linked in the description. And in the next video, we'll talk about layer shifting and how QuinlyVision can detect it. And that's all for today. So thanks for watching. Drop a like and remember to hit subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next video.